Tina's mind raced. How could he know? She and Malcolm had always kept a low profile, had always done their best to protect their children from the dangers of the world. What could this man know about them? Malcolm was already on his feet, his fists clenched in anger. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice cold and steady. The man just smiled again, a cruel, knowing look in his eyes. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." He took a step closer, and the sound of his boots on the floor sent a chill down Tina's spine. "You see, we know all about you. Your family. Your little secrets." He glanced at Tina, and his eyes flickered with something dark. Tina's stomach churned. What was he talking about? "You've been living in your bubble, pretending like you're untouchable, but that's about to change," the man continued, his grin widening. Tina's thoughts raced. How much did he know? Did he know about the altercations she'd had in the past? The ones she'd buried so deep in her memory? Her heart thudded painfully against her chest. What did he mean by consequences? But before she could voice another question, the man raised his hand, silencing her. "Enough of the small talk. This night is about one thing, sending a message." His eyes narrowed as he looked at Malcolm. "Your family has something that belongs to us, and tonight, we're here to collect. No one gets away." Malcolm's eyes hardened. He was already preparing for another confrontation. But Tina could feel the weight of the man's words. This wasn't about money. This wasn't just a robbery. There was something personal at stake, something that went far beyond the physical threat in front of them. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The message this man was talking about, was it something connected to Malcolm's past? Did it have to do with her own history? But there was no time to think. The moment the man took a step forward, Tina sprang into action. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy pot from the counter, and hurled it at the intruder. It collided with his chest, sending him stumbling backward. The gun in his hand clattered to the floor. "Get the kids!" Tina shouted at Malcolm, her heart pounding with urgency. But as the man recovered, he snarled and lunged forward, grabbing Tina by the arm and yanking her away from the counter. His strength was overpowering, but Tina wasn't about to let him take her. She fought back, kicking and squirming, desperate to break free. At that moment, Malcolm rushed forward, grabbing the man from behind and throwing him off of Tina. The two men struggled, each of them trying to overpower the other, but Tina knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. They needed to escape, and they needed to do it fast. "Go!" Malcolm shouted, but Tina hesitated, looking at the man with the gun still on the ground. He was dazed, but he wasn't done yet. She felt the tension building in her chest. Every second mattered. The house, once a sanctuary, had turned into a death trap. There was no safe place left. But they couldn't give up. Not now. Not when their children were counting on them. Tina's voice shook as she turned to the kids, who were still huddled together in the corner. "We're getting out of here. Stay close, and don't make a sound." Malcolm, still wrestling with the man on the floor, glanced up at Tina. His gaze met hers, full of raw determination. They were in this together. And no matter what it took, they would protect their family. With one last push, Malcolm managed to land a crushing blow to the intruder's stomach, sending him sprawling across the room. Tina didn't hesitate. She grabbed the kids by the hands and pulled them toward the back door, her heart pounding with every step. As they made it to the door, Tina took one last glance back, but the intruder was still down, unconscious for the moment. With a final surge of adrenaline, she kicked the door open and led her children into the freezing cold of the night. The cold air hit them like a wave, the icy wind cutting through their clothes as they ran toward the car. But there was no time to stop. No time to think. All that mattered now was getting to safety. But as they reached the car, Tina froze. The sound of footsteps behind them made her blood run cold. "They're coming," she whispered. Malcolm's face was pale, but his resolve never wavered. He turned to face the family, his voice steady despite the danger. "We'll make it through this," he said. "Just stay with me." Tina's heart pounded as she urged her children into the car. Every second felt like an eternity. Malcolm was still behind, his eyes scanning the darkness, trying to make sure no one was following them. The crunch of snow underfoot echoed in the night air, and the distant sound of their pursuers' footsteps only made the tension worse. "Mom, are we safe?" her daughter, Kendra, asked in a trembling voice, clutching her little brother close. Tina didn't answer right away. She couldn't afford to show fear, not now. She turned to her husband, her eyes locking with his. There was no doubt in his expression, Malcolm had never been one to show fear, even when the world seemed to fall apart around him. "We have to make sure we leave no trace," he said, his voice low but firm. "They'll know we're trying to escape. They'll follow. But we can't outrun them," Tina said, her mind racing. "We can't just keep running forever. We need to fight back." Malcolm glanced at her, understanding. She was right. They couldn't run indefinitely, especially not with the kids in tow. They needed a plan, and fast. He nodded in agreement, his mind already working through possible escape routes and ways to use the environment to their advantage. Tina reached for the car's door handle, her breath shallow in the cold air. As her fingers touched the cold metal, a sudden realization struck her: they were no longer just running. They were preparing for a fight. "Get in the car, everyone. We'll get to the safe house," Malcolm ordered. Kendra hesitated, glancing back nervously at the house. She could feel the weight of the danger in the air, and the unknown loomed large. Before anyone could say another word, a shout came from the distance, piercing through the cold night. "Don't even think about it." The voice sent a shiver down Tina's spine. It was one of the intruders, the leader, she guessed. The one who had been speaking earlier, the one who knew too much about their lives. He was closing in. There was no time left to wait. Malcolm slammed the car door shut and darted toward the side of the house, pulling Tina behind him as he reached for the nearest object, a heavy piece of wood from a broken fence nearby. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't make a sound. Stay hidden." Tina's mind raced. The kids were safe inside the car, but she wasn't sure how long that would last. The intruders were relentless, and they knew the layout of the house too well. They would find the car if they weren't careful. But she couldn't sit by and wait. Not when her family was at risk. She grabbed a rock from the ground, clutching it tightly in her hand. She was done running. It was time to fight back. Malcolm nodded at her, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, he motioned for her to stay close, and together they moved swiftly through the shadows, making their way around the perimeter of the house. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light on the snowy ground as they moved carefully. Every step was calculated, every breath held tight as they approached the back of the house. And then, they saw them. The intruders were spread out, their figures slowly circling the area as they searched for any sign of movement. One of them, wearing a dark, hooded jacket, was closer to the car. It was only a matter of time before he spotted Kendra and Jalen. Tina felt a surge of protective fury rise in her chest. She couldn't let them get to her kids. She couldn't let this family fall apart now, not when they were so close to being free. She turned to Malcolm, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll draw them away. You get to the car." Malcolm shook his head, a grim smile on his face. "We're in this together." With a nod, he adjusted his grip on the wooden plank and moved toward the first intruder. Tina followed behind, watching their every move, praying they wouldn't be spotted. When the intruder came closer, Tina took a deep breath and flung the rock she had been holding as hard as she could. The noise of it crashing against a window in the distance echoed through the quiet, drawing the attention of the intruders. "Over there," one of them shouted, his voice panicked. The group split up immediately, racing toward the sound of the window. Tina didn't wait to see if they would catch on. She took a quick glance back at Malcolm, who was already moving toward the car, keeping low to avoid detection. Her heart hammered as she sprinted toward the fence, hoping to draw the attention of the others away. They wouldn't stop coming until they found her family. They needed to make sure the intruders never got close again. Tina's legs burned as she ran through the snow, her breath sharp in the cold air. She could hear the thundering footsteps behind her, voices shouting, calling out to each other. They were gaining on her. She was almost there. Almost at the safe zone. And then, she felt the cold barrel of a gun against her back. "Got you," the voice sneered. It was the leader again. She had no time to think. Before the man could react, Tina spun around, grabbing the gun from his hands and twisting it in his grasp. He staggered back, but Tina didn't hesitate. She kicked him hard in the chest, sending him flying to the ground. She had no idea where Malcolm was, but she could feel the moment shift. The tides were turning. As the man groaned, struggling to regain his footing, Tina looked around. The other intruders were still distracted by the noise, but they would be back any second. And then, she heard a noise that made her blood run cold. Malcolm's voice, sharp with determination, cut through the chaos. "Tina, move." She didn't need to be told twice. The final stand was just beginning, and she was ready to do whatever it took to protect her family. The quiet after the storm felt like a blessing. Tina stood at the edge of the yard, her chest heaving as she looked over the chaotic scene. The adrenaline was slowly leaving her body, but the tension hadn't quite worn off yet. Every corner seemed like a potential threat, every sound a reminder of the terror that had just passed. Malcolm had been right by her side throughout it all. When the final intruder had been dealt with, they had made sure to double-check the house. No one was left inside. The fight had been messy, but the intruders had underestimated them. They hadn't just been fighting for their lives, they had been fighting for their future. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Tina allowed herself a moment to breathe. She'd never imagined that something like this would happen on what was supposed to be a peaceful night. A new year, a fresh start, yet it felt like it would forever be marked by the violence that had unfolded in their home. The police had arrived not long after they'd finished securing the house. As the officers filed in, Tina gave them the briefest of details, just enough to let them know who had been involved, but not too much. She didn't want to relive it. Not now. "I never thought it would come to this," Malcolm murmured beside her, his voice carrying the weight of his thoughts. "But I'm glad we got through it." Tina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked over at her children, who had been hiding in the basement during the worst of the commotion. The worry and fear in their eyes had been too much for her to bear, but now, they were safe. Safe because of what they had done together. Her daughter, Kendra, stepped out from the shadows of the house, holding Jalen's hand. Both of them looked at their parents, relief and exhaustion painted across their young faces. They had seen too much for their ages, but they had also learned something important: their parents were fighters. "What happened to them, Mom?" Kendra asked, her voice soft but edged with curiosity. "The people who tried to hurt us? They're gone now," Tina said, her voice steady. She wanted to comfort them, to take away the fear in their eyes. But she also knew they needed to hear the truth. They won't hurt anyone ever again. Malcolm stepped forward, offering his hand to Kendra. "You and Jalen, get in the car. It's time to go home. We're going to leave this behind us and look ahead. That's what matters now." Tina smiled at him, grateful for his unwavering strength in the face of it all. The events of the night had tested them in ways they never thought possible, but they had survived. And in the end, that's all that mattered. As the family gathered their things, heading toward the car, Tina glanced one last time at the house. It was a symbol of the life they'd fought so hard to protect, a life that had almost been stolen away from them. But they had defended it with everything they had. The sirens of the police cars slowly faded as the family drove off, the first rays of sunlight brightening the path ahead. There were scars, yes. They would never forget the terror they'd faced. But there was also a bond between them, stronger than ever before. Tina knew that, no matter what the future held, they would be ready. They had been tested, and they had come through victorious. They could face anything now, together. As they left the nightmare behind, a sense of peace finally settled over her. The worst was over. It had been a long night, but the dawn brought with it a new beginning, one where the family could heal, rebuild, and embrace the safety they had fought so fiercely for. "Happy New Year," Tina whispered softly, the words meant for herself as much as for her family. They had survived, and that was something to celebrate. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We've got plenty more suspense-filled stories coming your way, so make sure to stay tuned. And as always, feel free to check out